and good morning. So, purpose of this whole thing here is just to answer one simple question, which I've seen come up several times over the last few months of peddling this mod everywhere that anybody may be interested, which was, essentially, what is it? Long story short, one thing I've seen come up a lot, just talking with people that tried the original, was that they would usually go through it, usually go through the story one time. They would try some of the side content, try to get into the CODA and all that sort of thing, and, well, it all just kind of fell apart. Like, it got to the point where the setting was interesting, the characters were interesting, the ideas were interesting, but then when it came to actual balance, a lot of stuff just kind of hit the fan and went all over the place. A good example of this would be like if you look at any of the equipment of the base game, it's just a scattering of different stats all over everything, and not numbers that would ever really matter. Like all of the numbers are drastically reduced here, and even then, like a 2 or a 3 added to any of these, that's not going to make any sort of difference whatsoever. So, they had a habit of just sort of haphazardly scattering a lot of ideas. It kind of felt like partway through they didn't finish balancing it. They just kind of stopped. So, things like kill moves as a good example. A lot of them had a tendency to have one extraordinarily overpowered one. Rending Gale or Brimstone Hail are fantastic examples there. And other ones that you'd never use, like, Venomous Strike, I think it was called. It was just basically a sword move. It's either like, well, would you like to completely delete this guy from existence with your rank 2 move, or would you like to use the rank 4 one to poison them slightly, at the cost of like 5% of their health, so that they'll eventually have a problem, I don't know, like 40 turns down the line. It was one of those things where it seemed like they hadn't finished it exactly. So here's the short version. The overall purpose, the overall theme running behind One Vision is essentially everyone is a lot more human. Random soldier guy, they're going to be as good as one of your unique characters, with some exceptions. Your unique guys are going to have slight advantages, but they're still people. There's not going to be any more superhero stuff out of nowhere. Like, for example, Aracel never missing a single shot, or Volkert getting double turns on other units of the same class, or, some of your casters just being able to nuke stuff, while some of your other casters that are generics can't seem to put a scratch on anything. A lot of the balancing decisions were kind of almost MMO-isms. One great example of that. If you have the base game up, how many healing items do you have? You have your leaves, +1s, +2s, +3s, +4s. You have your seeds, +1s, +2s, +3s. You have your salves, and then you have your other items. Over and over and over, and you've got just so many copies of everything all over the place. So instead of endless redundancy all over the place, you got essentially a different healing item for each rank of field alchemy. And it's just, you have less chaos there. Look at your skill list as another example. Base game, you've got hundreds running down the list. Actually, I believe Denim here even still has some of those. Let's go ahead and browse it up. Go down here and see all these nothings? These are all of the ones that basically got put innately into the class or had something else done to them. So there are a lot of nothings. So, for example, stuff like Strengthen and Fortify, they're not around anymore. Most of your passive stuff, the boring passive stuff, is just built into classes and equipment now. So you can essentially equip your person for a particular job. You can equip them pretty much to resist a particular thing. Any of that. Like your choices for what they resist or what they hit are coming from their armor and weapons now. And all of their particular things have been split off into different categories, specifically like light. We got cloth, light, and heavy for armor, with variants on each of those. You go to your helmets, you have caster and physical helmets with variants on those. For your gloves, you have your caster, ranger, and melee variants. For your pants, you've got your cloth, light, and heavies again. And again, each of those have variants kind of branching off as you go. You've never really run into a point where you're running into several levels of, oh, I'm just going to hit 1 damage on everything until I finally get to that 1 level threshold, and then I get a new bow, and suddenly I can hurt things again. Instead, there is a much shorter distance from start to finish. So, for example, highest attack bow, let's say... bows are a pretty mild example. So the heaviest heavy bow, so two-handed bow, 129. Lightest heavy bow is 40, whereas before it would have been, quite a bit more drastic. Your short bows and heavy bows have a bigger difference between them, so like if you look right here, these would be your RT penalty. Dang it, go to the right one. There we go. It's like your RT penalties here. For your light bows, you can, for example, have light bow users that are useful all game, but mostly against lightweight targets. So you give like a rogue a bow and a dagger, and you can actually pull that off, because daggers have almost no weight. They have a very short use time. You have an ability like Speed Star, so they can essentially run up, shank something, usually get a second turn before that guy can act. And it's very useful. So the long and short of it, I'm not going to go into all of the details because this is the 3rd time I'm attempting this, and each time it ends up just going past an hour as I go into every single detail, just trying to even cover the basics of all the changes. So, everything's more uniform. Every class does what it says it does. So, warriors, they hit things really well. Their buff skill is a lot more useful than vanilla. Archers, they're meant to be a harassment class. Base game, they were overpowered in both offense and defense. Now they're basically tissue thin on defense, but have very long range. Also, their attack got decreased. They're still very useful because overall accuracy has been reduced across the board, so anyone that has a 100% chance to hit ability is far more useful. In addition, their abilities, their passive, or their buff ability is pretty much accuracy all around them, pretty similar to how the base one was. Wizards are more your offensive casters, whereas Warlocks are more of your AoE casters, whereas your Clerics and or Monks, in this case, I go over here, like she would be a monk, so your Clerics and Monks are your more defense-orientated healers. Your healers are actually useful now. They're healing scales. They can actually equip proper things. One of the things that made the SNES version and KOL very good was because you could essentially mix and match all kinds of cool stuff in order to build a class specifically how you wanted it. I mean, you wanted to give a longbow to your friggin' wizards or whatever? Yeah, they'd suck at it, but it was worth a shot. So, in general, that kind of stuff is available. I'm actually trying to find one particular unit here, because my favorite thing, if I can find it, I don't think I have one on this save. My favorite thing is actually giving claws and a shield to a monk, because they're much tougher now. They can equip evasive armor, so you can have them set up in a way where, they've got very, very evasive armor. They can dodge a lot of things physically. They can resist a lot of magical stuff pretty darn well. And then, essentially, claws have a poison effect on them now, for example. So, essentially, they get a counter hit, and they get a poison proc off of that, and they're essentially doing damage over time to a bunch of units around them. They're not squishy anymore, so you might think, hey, this seems overpowered, but based off of how they appear throughout the game. Alrighty, so we'll be editing that out. Little one decided to try and eat a folder, and she's got a tooth coming in, and yeah, that kind of hurts. So she's all good and happy now and munching away. Okay, so like I was trying to say, these guys, essentially, they dictate a lot of fights. And again, that might seem strange for a unit, but they can't offensively win on their own in most cases. So, essentially, they're very good for supporting front lines, but if those front lines were to reach them, they'd be in pretty severe trouble. It's an interesting balance. Again, they seem overpowered at first, but once you get used to it, it's a really interesting change. So, like, for example, you've got a bunch of, knights and stuff up front, and no matter how hard you hit those guys, odds are their defense will be high enough to the point where you won't be able to outdo their healing. Their healing scales very well now. In most cases, they will be able to top somebody off with a single action, and still be in a pretty good position to to act as a defensive point somewhere else. So essentially, unless they're stunned or silenced or taken out in some manner, they will still be able to keep an entire place in formation. And it works far better than you'd think. So finally, if you did a lot of runs of the base game, there were plenty of times where you would find yourself in a position where you have to use a formation, but the other guys, they just sort of went everywhere. This, weirdly enough, keeps them together and much more cohesive. So, anyway, it works beautifully. It's just something you gotta feel for yourself. Not a whole lot of describing I can do there. Spellblades, aka fencers, as I like to call them, base game, they were essentially hybrid casters that weren't very good at being a hybrid. In this case, they actually are, and they get a bunch of unique abilities, including the Only Revive ability. Actually, I believe there's one more that some other unit gets, but it's a little bit off in CODA and all that. But no, they essentially they can revive units. One thing I haven't mentioned up to this point is the fact that all revives got changed to evacuations. So if you lose a unit, unless you have a fencer to come in and sacrifice themselves, or Spellblade, as it were, they basically sacrifice themselves to bring back everybody within 2 tiles. So, essentially, if you don't have that, if a unit's down, they're down. You can either evacuate them to make sure they don't lose a life, or you can leave them there and basically take the loss. But, in general, this leads to a situation where you're going to be losing units more often, you're actually going to see the life system come into play, and it's actually going to be sensible. So you'll, again, my first time through, having no idea what the hell was going on, getting myself kicked all over the place, I lost exactly 1 guy, and that's because he got knocked off a cliff 3 times. So that is a very, very specific death condition, where they're just functionally immortal to anything but gravity. Anyways, so Spellblades are just like a good hybrid, whatever you need them to do, when you need to do it, like... They're there as... they can't heal anymore, I should probably mention that. But they're there as an offensive caster, they're there as a support unit, they can heal themselves pretty well, they're a good item user, they're a good fighter in general. They're a good all-purpose unit. But they won't be able to keep up with some of the others in their more specialized jobs. Knights here, as before, they're the best defensively. The cost of their shadow ability got reduced by about half, so there's actually a reason to use it. It's also been given double range, and additionally, they're just far better balanced in terms of how they take hits. So instead of they have higher health due to their available items, but generally aren't as utterly immortal as they were in base game. They have more weapon availabilities. Actually, in general, all the weapon availabilities make more sense for the job they have. Like, one-handed spears are a thing, for example. Knights will have them. Same thing with warriors, they get spears. Why did nobody get spears? Were there like 3 classes that could use spears? Or 4, I think. 4, maybe 5? I don't know. Either way, it was a very sharp minority that could use spears, especially when the first description was, hey, everybody can use this spear, and then nobody can use that spear. I was so disappointed. I might be a little bit obsessed with giving everyone polearms, but anyway. Knights are very good at holding lines. Again, they can spam their phalanxes, as they're called now, all over the place. Just set up an entire, pretty much impregnable wall. The AI generally won't attack them unless they have Terra Knights, which is an interesting segue into these guys, because Terra Knights are their counter. They're an actual counter. So where Knights get access to most of the one-handed melee weapons and are generally very defensive frontline fighters, Terra Knights are their offensive counterpart. Their defense is pretty decent. Again, just comparing the stats on the same guy here, you can see they lose a little tiny bit of physical, but they gain resistance. So they're no longer the one that just dies to everything like it's made of tissue paper, which was just... I don't know what they had against them. They sucked so bad in vanilla. So at any rate, there's actually a reason to use them. As opposed to the one-handers and shields that the Knight generally uses, they are mostly based around the two-hander variants. They get axes and hammers that are one-handed, but by and large, they're mostly based around doing debuffs, whereas knights are based around curing debuffs, but they can no longer heal. Healing is, in general, far more limited. So yeah, Terra Knights, they spam out debuffs. They actually can... no, whoops, I accidentally dropped my controller because I'm over here trying to stop the little one from eating this folder again. but no. So, what was I saying here? So, yeah, they actually get an ability to essentially destroy shadows, which was very specific in the original game, but has essentially been rebalanced in a way where they weaponize them. So if they run across a shadow and they dispel it, the thing, or they shadow break it, the thing explodes. Like, it hits everything around it. Which I guess kind of makes sense, because if it's like some weird ghost laser type of dealie, maybe all the physics in it explode. I don't know. It doesn't explain how they do it, they just do it, okay? But you can have an interesting team-up between them, too, because you would have this guy, you know, dropping phalanxes into the middle of a group, and then this guy would follow up and just pop them off, and it's interesting. You can do some pretty cool synergies with them, which I guess is another thing. All your units can actually synergize, like it's FFT or something. So a lot of them, you know, will work well together in different roles. They don't feel like you're trying to make a party of just hero units as it was in base game. Actually, it's funny, I've been watching this 100% run that this guy's been doing, and literally like 90% of it is 99.9% of it is just him running around and shooting everything with archers. Alright, moving on. Berserkers, they no longer have that invincibility move. They've gotten access to dual wielding. They essentially are just far better with their heavy weapons and all that. It should be noted at this point. Might be thinking, you know, what's the use of all these classes that can use heavy weapons? They don't suck anymore. We'll get to that in a moment. Point being, their whole skill tree is just based entirely on hitting stuff really hard now. They can sacrifice half their health to get full TP, for example. They can, they do their same AoE thing as before, and they have another one that, they haven't, what is it? I forget what it's called. It's an improved version of Sanguine, basically. A more balanced one. Swordmasters, still an evasion tank. They do have access to 4 different categories of swords now, though, instead of just two-hander katanas. Dragoons got access to guns, they got access to light crossbows, they lost access to their heavy heavy crossbows. They got access to the weapons that they usually use from older games. You know, all their swords, two-handers, axes, whatever. And yeah, they do their job very well. They're also better as a general purpose unit. So just like the Spellblade, they get access to instills, which are a free move now, by the way. When I'm referring to a free move, I just mean it's their action move. It's just easier to say free move. It's not actually free. It does give you an increase in your recovery time, but either way, you can take a secondary action during your turn. So they've got casting abilities, they've got buff abilities, they've got their usual slaying abilities, and they even have the ability to ignore terrain with one of their later abilities from FFT. So they're just better overall. You actually have a reason to keep one around when you don't have a dragon around, that's what I'm trying to say. These guys are more into their more canonical scout role now. So, vanilla, they were outrageously overpowered. Like, they basically just got a hard defense move that made them nigh invincible to physical damage. They were resistant to everything else. They hit ridiculously hard, and they even had shields in case you needed that on them. They got a casting ability, and you could just utterly break the game with them, and not to mention they were ludicrously fast. So now they have only access to light things. They can have they've got an expanded set of weapons they can use. They can use 2 of them, but they're actually pretty functional just using one light weapon and no shield or anything. Essentially, they're there to completely sneak around the map and go and ambush somebody on the other side, as their name would imply. Again, ninjas were, historically speaking, more scouts than what popular culture tends to depict them as. You know, they weren't crazy martial artists or whatever else. They were spies, scouts, that sort of thing. Actually, if you read up on the history of what's the Sengoku period and all that, like there are a bunch of accounts of like, okay, you know, they were just functioning as pathfinders. They weren't there assassinating specifically, and you know, they could be, but they were kind of freelance spies, is the best way to put it. Anyway, moving on. Rogues, you know, their traps got pretty much boosted to the point of amazingness. They also have buff traps. If you've played FFTA 2, essentially they're the ranger from that in many ways. They still have their speed up moves, they still have their stealing moves. I should note at this point that the skill ranks on each of these go up about 10 to 15 times faster, I believe he said. So you actually have a reasonable... there's a good chance you'll actually level them up. Not to mention the steel table will actually be improved down the line. That's something that's still being implemented, but it will be down the line. It's actually pretty useful just as a general crafting ingredient thing right now. Point being, they are very, very good flankers. Because of their speed, should be noted at this point, each unit has a cost associated per tile. This isn't... By the way, I don't know if that music's coming through, but if so, enjoy baby music. But yeah, they have a cost associated that's added to this score right here with every tile. Theirs is tied with Griffins for the lowest. So they move very fast, they get a speed up move on top of that, and they also have access to long-range heavy crossbows, making them, if you have like 2 or 3 of them, they can make a pretty fantastic just flank sniping squad. Fusiliers over here, pretty similar to how they've always been. They're also the only ones with access to barricades. Those eventually, once it... I understand he's still working to implement it at this point, but those barricades are planned to do a sort of area damage thing at some point. But yeah, they can still shoot through obstacles and that sort of thing. However, their kill moves on their guns, so I should mention all of those got rebalanced. Rebalanced to a point where most of them are based off of their base weapon damage with some sort of plus on it. Like Fusiliers, all of their kill moves are standard shot with another effect added. So, for example, they've got a Bewitching one, they've got a Silencing one, they've got one that resets their turn, they've got one that, I believe there's one that not hobbles, but binds. I might be wrong on that last one. But either way, we'll check on that in a moment. Point being, they're based around status effects rather than being insanely overpowered. Beast Tamers, they've gotten a bunch of new free move abilities to boost their pets, including stuff like healing them for half their health and speeding them up and all that. So they're far better at their job. They also got access to more weapons as pretty much everybody else did, including spears. Everybody got spears. It's fantastic. Warlocks are much more akin to their KOL variant. Essentially, they can use AoE abilities of all types. They can use their Draconic stuff, which is available earlier, by the way, and available from the store. The only reason to go to the stores in POTD and or get all the crazy drops from friggin' San Bronza and all that are to get some of the super rare ones. So, Draconic stuff is actually a thing that people might encounter. It was the most bizarrely useless, absurdly hidden game mechanic I've ever seen. Like, hey, congratulations, you've gone and, like, completed hundreds of fights, gotten, you know, a class leveled up from friggin' scratch, you've gotten this guy to be decent. Your prize is an ability that archers had from the start of the game. Congratulations! Yay! They can use ballistics. Anyway, point being, they were a shockingly horrific time sink originally, whereas now, they are, well, the scholarly characters that they were advertised to be. And over here, Necromancers, they are now essentially a kind of a long-range caster of sorts with a additional thing of using crossbows and having a guaranteed hit ability for their crossbows, which again is kind of a rarity, as it were. They're the only other one with there's essentially 3 classes with guaranteed hit abilities at range. They have one of them. And on top of that, they have their usual necromancy stuff. So they've got a lot more interesting stuff going on. They usually won't be very good with their crossbows without that ability, since their agility absolutely sucks. But yeah. Oh, I should also mention the Warlock thing I was talking about earlier. They're essentially able to do sword and board now. So, yeah, they can do the whole sword thing they were doing in KOL. White Knights got improved. Basically, their interesting abilities stayed. Their boring ones got replaced with other stuff. In Paladin, same deal. Astromancer, same deal. As in, they don't have that bizarre ability where they tell you how many skill points you've gotten. That's your prize for going through Palace of the Dead several times. You get to know that score that's on the stat menu. How useful. So instead he gets, the general buff abilities, for example, like this is what this used to be. So it gives Enfeeble in an area as an action move, so he can go weaken an entire group before he goes and just nukes that group. And it's way more useful than knowing how many points you've gotten. But, okay, so, I could go on and on about this friggin' forever, because it'll end up, there's like 50 classes or whatnot, and frankly, again, you'll probably end up using the ones you want to use. It's absolutely fair now. You don't need every single class, you can use the ones that you need. Personally, I always prefer to just get everybody doing everything, but then again, I'm just a weirdo like that, so... You want to, go and use a few classes and not break the game? Perfectly possible now, because in general, a level difference of like even up to 10, not gonna go and win the fight on its own. That's not exactly a thing anymore. I'm hoping at some point there'll be a version in which level scaling is available from the very start, because it's really only your first run that level scaling isn't a thing. Once you get anyone past 30, you just get permanent level scaling applied to your save file. To my knowledge, that is not a code that is currently discovered. So, anyway, point being, once you get past that point, it's not really much of an issue anymore. The only time that you'll see a huge difference in terms of stats is if somebody's at level 1 and they're fighting 30s or something. And, even then, they'll still be able to do some damage. They're usually just going to be doing their weapons additional damage, so they won't be getting any of their base attack stat through. But still, point being, if there's a person hitting another person, they're going to hurt that other person. There's none, I wouldn't say absolutely none, but dramatically less of that whole, check out all my RPG powers, you hit 1 damage kind of nonsense. Alright, moving on. It's just fair to say, every job is good at its job now. Like, without any questions, at least not to my mind, every job is good at what it does. And it's made far more interesting, their weapon selection makes more sense. Essentially, if you miss the old feeling from the older games of, I have this unit, I have this particular idea in mind, and then you go and you make that particular thing happen, that's what this mod allows. Another thing that I see mentioned all the time is crafting was a pain, it is impossible. Very true. Check out this 100% success rate on everything. Check out how you don't necessarily need a bunch of ridiculously rare things on everything. But you know what the best part is? It's right down here. Check this out. You just have 3 types of ore. You turn them into whatever you want. You don't have to go through a bunch of hoops. You don't have to go and poach the friggin' countryside. And I do mean that literally, as in in order to get a reasonable supply of iron, and therefore steel, and therefore all the other types of metal, you had to go and just, poach, hell, just dozens of dragons and beasts and whatever else from the woods, and just sell them over and over, and then you rebuy the iron ore. And it was just the fastest way to get the stuff in bulk. Now you just buy the ore, because why is it so difficult to get a hold of? Anyways, all this stuff is available now. A lot easier to get. There's a lot of cases where you're just always going to have an easier time crafting stuff in this. If there's a particular rare item or something, you may need it, but by and large, it's gonna make more sense now. You had some weirdly specific stuff locked away in weirdly specific places. So, like the Arm Guard in Sheridian, instead of having armor that, you reasonably would want to have at that point, that is moved instead to the regular armor book. Whereas the, rare book here that gives you a grapple claw or a poison punching fist. You know, for your armor, you've got all your specific side grade kind of things going on. For your helm and shredding, you have your fancy helmets here. Whereas your regular armor smithing stuff has the stuff that you would actually use at this point. So, really nifty. You know, you get stuff like this, different side grades, upgrades. It should be pointed out. When I'm saying upgrades, I'm actually incorrect. These are all of the crafting stuff with, I don't know, there may be some arguable exceptions, but these are either new things or they are side grades. It's like these are all new. For example, this, to my mind, is the only direct upgrade, the Savage Assault. And this neatly segues into another thing here, wherein, check it out, you got your Lizard class marks available at the start of Chapter 2, or middle of Chapter 2. So you don't have to wait a billion years to actually go and unlock all your extra classes for your Lizards. They aren't sitting there being Berserkers and Warriors until the end of Chapter 3 or whatnot. So I think that's around the earliest that you can actually start getting them. So you don't have to go for drops, you can actually make those. You have your rare class marks and stuff like that, like all your Gunners and Occultists and all of that. You just pick up the transcription book from Palace of the Dead. You can get all of these. The Hyanite marks, Pirate marks, Champion marks, all of these, oh, Heretic marks especially, all of these were hidden away as very specific rare drops from like one enemy in one particular fight after a chain of other fights that you would just never run into. So, yeah, you can just make them now. Far more sensible. It's still a little bit of a thing to be able to go and get the transcription book. Bear in mind that when it comes to stuff like transcription and the Enchiridions, there is a plan down the road, as soon as it's possible, to essentially have a 100% chance to drop those particular things. Like, for example, the Wind God weapons, or the crafting books, or just anything that isn't like a generic weapon that's an upgrade to something. You know, the stuff that you would actually go and repeatedly grind for because it's some unique thing. All of those are supposed to be guaranteed drops before the end of the mod, so before 1.0. So we're going to be seeing that pretty soon here, hopefully. Yeah, you got different craftables here. This is what I was talking about for evacuation items. So, Lifeline gems and Salvation gems, they're, I believe, different range versions. Let's take a look at them real quick. When your units get incapacitated, you can only... The only way you can revive them, as I've mentioned previously, is with a fencer, or spellblade in this case, sacrificing themselves. So in this case, you have this one, which is a range 2, or this one that's a range 6. These are two items that you get only as drops at this point. You can't buy more of them, and that will evacuate somebody. The resurrection abilities, they got changed to Rescue 1 and Rescue 2, or Evacuation 1 and Evacuation 2. And yeah, so that's... If somebody goes down, it actually matters now. Another cool thing here, you may have already noticed this, these guys have new uniforms, new looks. So Lancelot looks all shiny. Gildas actually looks different from Myrddin. You get Diebold looking all shiny now. Warren is looking more like his portrait. You get Rudlam looking like one of the Templars, because it's kind of funny. Apparently somewhere it's hinted at that he's a bad guy anyway. He's just sort of around, and that never got fleshed out. You got Deneb getting a kind of darker look here. Just a lot of them look nicer. You got Sarah and Voltaire getting unique sprites. Voltaire's dead on this file, so I can't show him, but he's a red knight. So Sarah looks has the portrait of a female knight, and has the sprite of a female swordmaster, meant to look like a female version of Orson from KOL. Elrig actually looks like his backstory now. Donalto actually looks like a decrepit old man now. Berta and Abda also have different sprites, although only one of them have survived this far on this run. Felicia's got a different sprite. Basically everyone that you probably played through several times and you thought, yeah, I'm kind of tired of seeing that particular one, well, they got upgraded. Fulkert has a sprite that actually matches his look a lot better now, so it's good stuff. It's good stuff. Oh, I should also mention Shamos here. Where are they? Chamos, Tammuz, and Festa. So the neutral trio. They also have unique sprites because they had unique backstories. Tammuz is also the only one of the three with unique class choices because he can essentially be human classes, lizard classes, and snake classes. Actually, I think these just count as lizard classes, but whatever. He gets lizard classes and human classes, so he does cool stuff. What else do we want to cover here? So, one to cover crafting, covered class marks, those are available in a much more reasonable way. Covered classes, okay, formations. At this point, if we look here at the spears, there's a bunch of them that have... all of these weapons, by the way, they have a standard variant and a side grade variant. And the side grade variants are just experimental versions. So, like, for example, for spears, there would be pikes. So those were semi-available in base game. But the problem was they were kind of obligatory. Like, if you upgraded a standard spear to have decent attack power, then you just had to deal with the 2 to 3 range instead of, you know, if you wanted it to be 1 and 2. In this case, you know, it's a very... between these two, as an example, it's a very, very, very slight difference. It's friggin' 4 points. And yeah, so you aren't forced into that kind of stuff. For each of the classes, there's that same system. I'm not going to go into all of them because it gets really specific, and I swear every time I've tried starting a part to talk about all that, it ended up going up past an hour. So, long story short, each one's got a different variant for stuff that you want to do. Like, you got daggers for mages, you got daggers for assassins, like, you got swords for primarily sword fighters, other ones for defensive fighters, and, you know, heavy two-handers, standard two-handers. There's a ton of stuff. It's one of those things where you just go through, you see what role you want somebody to fill, and just build it. You will have the option to make it. Okay, what else? Uniques. Yeah, so I mentioned the thing about the uniques. MP to TP, a lot of stuff. Let me see if I can... yeah, there we go. So, let's look at Sistina here. Oh, it should be mentioned, scrolls and books and stuff, you can't use them as an item anymore. They have to learn it before the fight, and then they permanently know it. But, yeah, using items to replace casters is no longer an option, so works much better this way. They've also been improved and just generally work better. So we browse here. As you see here, they have a TP cost instead of an item cost. The only ones with an item cost still are ninja stuff, because most of it's based off of them using some kind of assassin tool. So, these ones, like the dancing abilities or whatever, instead of wasting a crap ton of money for fans, which somehow catch fire every time or something, essentially they can just go and use TP for that. So, yeah. You can have a thing where they're doing dances during their turns, taking counters, getting more TP, using preempt at the same time, you know, and just... it works really well. It just works really well. Just a lot of things got replaced in that regard. Dancers work the same way, or singers, rather, which, by the way, familiars now have access to songstress, so you can have more than one singer. Their abilities got improved, so they get access to the sword dancer dances also. Just browse this real quick. You know, some of their regular stuff ends up getting updated to be more interesting. Alright, what else? Movement. A lot of movement abilities are just are built into the class, as are... you know, all of the, like, strength and fortify and everything else. I don't know if I mentioned those yet. Those are all just built into the classes and equipment at this point. So, again, feels more realistic in terms of, like, you can understand it on a logical level, not realistic in terms of, oh, they got a cut and they got infected and they died. Those kinds of mods suck. This one is more like, okay, that guy hit that other guy with that other thing, therefore it hurt. Not, you know, that guy's stats weren't high enough, therefore he just completely ignored a hammer to the face. Right, so generally speaking, everyone's movement is much freer now, but the abilities for different terrain traversal are still very useful around endgame, so teleportation, flotation, all of that sort of thing. So you'll definitely get a lot more use out of those. Base stats are something that stays static throughout the entire thing. The only way to actually change those is cards at this point, and that's 1 point at a time. And that, personally I prefer to play with a cheat code that turns that off entirely, but that may end up getting removed at a later time. Because, honestly, just having flat base stats means that nobody can ever become superhuman, which makes this... just the story, the fights, everything. You think it would be just more challenging, but no, it changes everything in a beautiful way. Like, just everything is suddenly more believable. You don't have those moments of like, wow, I just completely didn't earn this kind of stuff. It feels really good, and it's not a difficulty mod. Again, I want to clarify. Everyone's more effective. Your guys aren't necessarily nerfed, they're just on the same level as everyone else. Which, again, base game, your guys were just so far and beyond everyone else it didn't even matter. Which, I guess at that point I should mention, on Dark Knights in general, got improved. They're the exception, they're just better. In general, they're going to be far superior to most other stuff you're running into, meaning that they're actually more interesting to fight now. So, I mentioned all the mechanic stuff, mentioned some nerf stuff, excessive skills, mentioned those, elemental stuff. Usually endgame revolved around being able to mess with the whole elemental extra damage system. That's actually available from mid-game now. Skill level up speed, yeah, that's all like 10 to 15 times higher now. Oh, okay, so RT and stat uniformity. So that's the last thing I want to cover here. Comparing base game to this, right? You got a Hauberk, this counts as heavy. You got a Balder, this counts... well, this is more like a medium, I suppose. But no, so, male Hauberk, weight 12. Balder, 12. Friggin', where is it? Where is that? Worm scale, 12. All the heavies are 12. If it's heavy, it's 12. Like, if it's special, it's got a different thing. If it's, you know, if it's light, it's 4. If it's medium, it's 8. If it's, you know, something between medium and heavy, it's a 10. They've got side grades, they've got different variants, but point being, each of the categories, they are uniform throughout the entire game. Base game had a problem in which it kept adding RT more and more the more your stuff improved, and it resulted in very odd turn orders towards the very end, to the point where if you upgraded somebody, suddenly they became ridiculously slow. I think that was supposed to try to counterbalance the whole, you know, levels getting out of whack thing, but it just was such a statistical fustercluck that, no. It didn't work. But yeah, no, in general, everything's uniform, which means that your turns, based on how your builds go, will be consistent. Changing one person, you know, changing somebody will not immediately, like, let's say you upgraded somebody, it'll not cause them to slow down. And in general, since all of those stats got moved into equipment, there's no benefit to actually running in naked. Even the most extreme example, the Warren fight, even that one, in one version, it was actually still something that helped, but as of the most recent version, no. There's really no reason to run up to the guy naked. You can reasonably get to him in time to actually evacuate him out, which is another thing I should mention. For NPCs where you have to save them, you can evacuate them out. You don't have to, you know, rely on their stupid AI not getting themselves killed. You can just get them the hell out of there, and that's that. You just save them, and you're done. But yeah, I think that pretty well covers everything. You know, your items make more sense. There's a Dragon Slayer now. I just love that this is the best now. So, yeah. I think you kind of get the point. Essentially, at this point, I'm fairly confident in saying this is the superior version. This is the best version. Like, normally when there's a mod, there's a certain split point between, you know, at what point is it a mod and at what point is it just the better version, and right now it's gotten to that point. The live system actually matters. You're actually reasonably having a chance to lose units. You might actually have casualties over the course of your run. You'll end up using all of the mechanics that are there. You'll have more use out of... There really isn't a case where there's just skills that you will never use. You know, different situations occur, and there's different stuff for situations always available. Leveling up classes is much better. It hasn't changed much. Like, the overall experience thing hasn't changed that much. But, in general, your lower levels will still be able to keep up with your higher levels. Up to a certain degree. Like, if there's up to a 10 level difference, they're still going to be fine. Otherwise, you know, you just leave them in the back. But by and large, they do a far better job of actually keeping up and remaining competent. Again, a lot of their damage comes from their respective skills. So, like, for example, if this guy got reduced to a lower level, he would still retain a good majority of his damage. His class level wouldn't necessarily count for that much. There's a much tighter range in terms of where the weapon damages go, and especially a lot of their bonus damage. So again, the attack stat, in case you weren't aware, is primarily for getting past the defense stat, and then all the other ones are added on top of that. So the easiest way to say is just, overall, your likely minimum damage is very likely going to be higher, and, well, everyone's health on the lower end is far lower, and everyone's health on the tankier end is far higher. And their health, like FFT, is primarily decided by all their extra equipment here. Like, this guy is getting 102 just from this basic setup. So, you know, you get a lot of extra stuff. Actually, wait a second, no, he's getting 142 out of this setup. Unless this is adding anything, no. But the exact nitty-gritty of all of the little side grades and everything, you know, that's up for you to test. Pretty much, like I said before, you want a class, you can make it. You can more uniformly make people. You don't have to worry about running into a situation where it's like, well, I could only afford to upgrade this one thing, or I only got a drop of this one thing. Now, between the two bodyguard guys I had for my leader, and now one of them is just obviously better than the other one, I might as well turn the other one into a different class entirely now. You don't have those moments as much. Actually, at all, really. You can reasonably put, like, let's say right here, I have these knights, right? They've been these guys right here have just been functioning as a rotating squad of sorts, and they did so throughout the entire time without any real obvious, like, hey, this guy is trash, kick him out kind of moment. Like, they just retain their competence. You know, you just make squads of doing certain things, like these two right here were doing fantastically right next to each other for a while. It's just, you can make groups. You can make uniform parties. In general, everything's just better. That sounds like I'm exaggerating, but oh well. I actually don't know if I mentioned this particular thing right here, which was their templates. When you recruit units, they have 3 different templates they can have, and, like, for example, this one, it would be a rogue template, because all of his dex, agility, and avoidance are all far higher than his other stats, so he'd be better for those jobs. And throughout the entire game, he will remain better at those jobs. Your base stats no longer increase from leveling up in other things, so... Anyway. Also, Little One says hi, by the way. Any darn ways, I think that pretty well covers everything. You know, in case I forgot something, let me know. I will answer questions on this thing, and, yeah, go try out this friggin' mod. It is amazing. Just the amount of effort that he went through to get this thing going, the sheer complication of actually modding this thing is so well beyond me, it gave me a headache when he tried to explain to me how to do one code. So, it's amazing. It's just... I'm just amazed that it even exists. That's why I've been trying to get people to try it for months. I mean, it's amazing, like I said. I will say, if you're upgrading to version 8.9, there's currently a thing if you're running it on an old PSP. Previous versions can go on it. Version 8.9, there's currently a thing being worked on to actually fix that there's a particular crash that happens if you load older files that have a ton of equipment on them, because some of the higher end things apparently due to the way that stuff was shuffled around causes a lockup. But either way, that's a very specific situation. If you're using any version prior to 0.89, you won't get the side grades, but either way, hopefully that will end up getting patched out pretty soon. And yeah, we'll see you soon. Happy modding and have a good day.